The war ended not with a roar, but with a silence that unsettled the women more than gunfire ever had. One morning the guards read orders aloud. Germany had surrendered. The Reich was broken. For the prisoners, the words fell like stones. Some wept openly, others clenched fists until their nails cut into their palms. The shame was unbearable, but beneath it lived another truth. Now their time in America would end, and with it the strange, forbidden thread that had bound them to their captors. The camp shifted overnight. Guards walked with a different posture, lighter but also conflicted. The women noticed how eyes lingered longer now, as though both sides knew their glances had an expiration date. The restraint that once felt permanent now felt fragile, ready to shatter under the weight of farewell. Every day carried the sense of something slipping away. Whispers among the prisoners grew more urgent. "We will leave soon. Perhaps next month. Perhaps tomorrow." The uncertainty magnified every interaction. A guard holding open a gate, a soldier handing out rations, even the briefest smile became charged with meaning. What had once been a game of denial became a series of final performances, silent confessions passed without words. One evening, a soldier lingered near the barracks, his patrol slower than usual. Inside, the women hushed, pretending to sleep. One dared to peek through a crack in the wooden wall. She saw him pause, staring at the building as though memorizing it. His shoulders sagged, his hand clenched the strap of his rifle, and then he walked away. She never saw him again. In her diary she wrote, "He said nothing, but his silence told me everything. He wished to remember us. He wished to keep something of us when we are gone." Farewell came in waves. Trucks arrived to carry groups of women back toward ports. Each departure was a wound for those who left and those who remained. At the gates, guards stood in rows. Some saluted stiffly, others shifted uneasily. One prisoner locked eyes with a soldier as she climbed onto the truck. Neither spoke, but the look between them was so raw that her companions whispered about it for days. Later she confessed, "I felt more seen in that one look than in all the years of my marriage. It will haunt me forever." For the guards, the departures were equally haunting. They had carried out orders with discipline, but beneath the surface they had lived another war entirely, a war of restraint, of longing, of forbidden admiration. To watch the women leave was to watch possibility vanish forever. One guard scribbled in his journal, never sent, never shared, "I will never see her again. I never touched her, never spoke her name, but she has marked me. I am ashamed to admit it, but I would rather stand another year of war than feel this emptiness." The voyages back to Europe were long and bitter. The women stood at ship rails, watching America fade into horizon mist. They had arrived expecting cruelty and humiliation, prepared for chains. They left carrying something far stranger, the memory of men who had desired them but never crossed the line of discipline. It was a paradox that gnawed at them in silence. One whispered to her bunkmate, "They wanted us, yet they let us go. Why?" The answer never came, but the question followed them across the ocean. For the prisoners, the greatest shock was not in the preparations themselves, but in the fact that they were allowed. They expected confiscation, punishment, mockery. Instead, they found cooperation. The guards did not join, but neither did they stop it. The silence of tolerance was louder than permission. And so the stage was set. The trees were decorated with paper and tin, the carols practiced, the food saved. Yet still, doubt lingered. Would the Americans change their minds at the last moment? Would the celebration be cut short? The men whispered of it in bunks at night, holding their breath for the days to come. December 24th arrived clear and cold. Frost glittered on the barbed wire, smoke curled from chimneys, and the camp grew unnaturally still. Inside the barracks, men sat waiting, hearts heavy with memory and hope. Then, slowly, a voice began to sing. Stille Nacht. Another joined, then another, until the hymn swelled strong and full, carrying across the camp. Guards at their posts paused, listening. Some mouthed the words, remembering their own families. A prisoner later wrote, "We sang as though the wire did not exist. The guards did not stop us. For a moment we were not prisoners, we were men." What happened that night would be remembered for decades. The prisoners shared their hidden stores, bread broken carefully, fruit divided into small pieces, sugar dissolved into weak coffee. Some camps received Red Cross parcels, canned meat, butter, even chocolate. Guards entered quietly, offering greetings. "Merry Christmas." Prisoners answered with "Frohe Weihnachten." The irony was sharp, but the kindness undeniable. Children from nearby towns pressed gifts through the wire, knitted scarves, carved toys, marbles. In return, prisoners handed back wooden figures, sketches, simple tokens crafted from scraps. One guard later confessed, "It felt wrong and yet right. For men far from home, these simple gifts felt priceless." A guard remembered, "The farmers gave as if the Germans were neighbors, not enemies. I saw grown men cry into their food inside the barracks." As the meal began, the carols returned, this time louder, stronger. German voices lifted in Stille Nacht, answered by English voices outside the barracks. Silent Night carried across the camp in two languages, flowing like a prayer for peace. Prisoners and guards alike paused, listening to the harmony. For a brief moment, the wire between them meant nothing. Children appeared at the fences once more, pressing apples, candy, or small wooden toys into prisoners' hands. The Germans responded with carved trinkets, figures shaped from scraps, simple jewelry made from tin, sketches of farmhouses. One prisoner wrote, "I gave a boy a small horse carved from wood. He smiled as though I had given him the world. I thought of my own son and felt my heart break." Even the guards softened. Some shook hands with the men they once watched with suspicion. A few dared to say "Merry Christmas" and meant it. The shock was not in the food or the gifts, but in the realization that the enemy had chosen kindness over cruelty. That morning, the prisoners discovered something more powerful than propaganda, the humanity of their captors. In some camps, Protestant and Catholic services were held. Chaplains led prayers in German, speaking of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. The irony was not lost. The prayers of men who had once fought to destroy America now rising within its heartland. Yet the message carried weight. One prisoner later wrote, "I prayed with my enemy, and yet I felt heard. It is the strangest memory of my life." The rest of Christmas Day unfolded in a haze of disbelief. Some prisoners laughed, others cried, some sat quietly, overwhelmed. Letters home could not contain these truths. They would be censored, stripped of detail. One man scribbled a line into his diary. "I wanted to tell my mother I ate chicken and jam on Christmas morning, that I sang Silent Night with Americans. But if I wrote it, the letter would never pass. So I write it here, and only I will know." For many, the day marked a turning point. Until then, captivity had been defined by silence, suspicion, and propaganda. The Reich had painted America as weak, decadent, cruel. But the Christmas of 1944 shattered that illusion. It showed the prisoners a different face of their enemy, one of restraint, faith, and generosity. The realization was disorienting. If Americans could be merciful, then what else had been lies? The days after Christmas carried a strange warmth. The gifts were eaten, the carols faded, but the memory lingered. Guards smiled more often, prisoners greeted them with nods. Farmers who had sent baskets looked at their workers differently, seeing not just laborers but men with families waiting far away. A fragile bridge had been built, invisible but undeniable. Yet the prisoners also carried guilt. They thought of their loved ones in Germany, shivering in bombed-out houses, scraping for scraps of bread. The abundance of America felt like betrayal. One prisoner admitted in his diary, "I tasted chocolate today. My sister has not seen such food in years. I ate it with guilt, but I could not refuse the kindness." The paradox haunted them. They were enemies treated with dignity, fed while their families starved, shown mercy while their homeland burned. It was a kindness that hurt as much as it healed. As winter passed into spring, the memory of Christmas remained a touchstone. Men whispered of it in bunks at night, recalling the candles, the songs, the laughter of children outside the wire. It became a symbol of something larger, the possibility that humanity could survive even in war. By the next Christmas, the war was over. Germany lay in ruins, but the prisoners remained in America, awaiting repatriation. Once again, farmers sent baskets, guards smiled, carols rose across the barracks. For the Germans, it was confirmation that the previous year had not been an accident. Compassion had not been a fleeting miracle, but a tradition. One prisoner wrote, "I feared last Christmas was a miracle never to be repeated. But again the farmers gave, the guards smiled, and we sang." The miracle returned. This time the carols carried a new meaning, not as a prayer for peace, but as a celebration that peace had finally come. The second Christmas became a farewell of sorts. Prisoners knew they would soon be repatriated. They cherished each gift, each song, each smile, as though storing memories for the journey home. One man described it simply, "We go back to Germany, but part of us will never leave this place. Christmas here has changed us forever." The Americans, too, felt the weight of these moments. Guards admitted privately that wishing their prisoners well on Christmas felt less like duty and more like truth. Farmers continued to send food and gifts, not because of orders, but because of bonds formed through shared labor and humanity. Children pressed apples and candy through the wire again, their laughter unchanged. And so, for 2 Christmases in captivity, men who had marched across deserts and fought under Hitler's banner discovered something they never expected: mercy in the heart of their enemy. The shock was not only in the celebration itself, but in what it revealed. It showed them that compassion could outlive hatred, that even in the midst of war, peace could find a place to breathe, if only for a moment. That discovery would follow them home, carried in silence, hidden in diaries, whispered only in old age. For the German POWs who celebrated Christmas, as with their captors, the memory became a legacy, not of defeat, but of humanity. By the spring of 1946, the camps began to empty. Orders arrived, trucks lined the fences, and the men who had spent years behind wire prepared to return home. Yet as they packed their few belongings, blankets, diaries, carved trinkets, they carried something far heavier: the memories of 2 Christmases that had altered them forever. The departure was bittersweet. Many longed for home, aching to see mothers, wives, children after years of silence. But they also knew they were leaving behind the strangest mercy they had ever known. In America, they had tasted bread and chocolate while their families in Germany starved. They had sung carols with guards, received gifts from farmers' children, and shaken hands with men they were told to hate. To return home was to return to ruins, to hunger, to suspicion. To leave America was to lose the fragile humanity that had sustained them through captivity. The last weeks before departure carried a weight of quiet farewells. Farmers gathered at fences, nodding to the men who had worked their fields. Some pressed final gifts, apples, scarves, photographs, through the wire. A few even wept openly, surprising the guards as much as the prisoners. One farmer's daughter later recalled, "He shook my hand through the fence. We said nothing, only looked at each other. Then he was gone. I never saw him again." On the trucks, prisoners clutched these tokens as though they were lifelines. A carved toy, a scarf, a Bible passed through the wire. Each carried more meaning than words could hold. They knew they could never explain these friendships back in Germany. To admit them was dangerous, even unthinkable. So they carried them silently, buried like treasures in their hearts. At the ports, the ships waited. The same Liberty vessels that had once brought them to captivity now stood ready to return them to freedom, or what passed for it. Guards escorted them aboard, some shaking hands, some offering final words. Good luck. For the first time, the prisoners believed those words were genuine. As the ships pulled away, men stood at the rails, watching the American coast fade. They carried with them not only belongings but memories, candles glowing in barracks, songs sung in 2 languages, bread shared across fences. The return to Germany was jarring. The docks were crowded with families, but the faces were gaunt, the eyes hollow. Children clung to mothers with thin arms, bellies swollen from hunger. Cities lay in rubble, streets choked with debris, homes reduced to skeletons of stone. The prisoners stepped into devastation, and the contrast with what they had left behind cut like a knife. One man wrote in his hidden diary, "I came from a land where children gave me apples. Here my own son eats grass. I cannot speak of it. It is too cruel." The Christmases in America became unspeakable memories. To tell their families that they had feasted while others starved, that they had sung with their captors, would have been betrayal. So they spoke instead of labor, of discipline, of waiting. They told only half-truths. The rest they buried. Yet the memories endured in silence. At night, some whispered them to wives decades later. Some confessed in old age to children or grandchildren. Diaries found long after deaths revealed the truth, that behind wire, far from home, they had discovered kindness they never expected. For the Americans, too, the memories lingered. Farmers kept the toys carved by prisoners, tucked in boxes or displayed on shelves. Old men told stories of the Germans who worked our fields, who sang at Christmas. Children who had once pressed apples through fences grew old remembering the day strangers handed them wooden horses or tin figures. The guards, now veterans of a war defined by blood, carried the softer memories of barracks filled with song. Historians often overlooked these moments. They filled books with battles, generals, treaties. But in the quiet corners of war, another history endured, a history of candles, carols, bread, and mercy. One prisoner summed it simply in his old age. "When I tell my grandchildren of the war, I do not tell them of battles. I tell them of Christmas in America, when the enemy fed me." The shock for the Germans had never been the abundance itself. It was the restraint, the choice. Their captors had power. They could have denied them everything. Instead, they gave. That choice shattered propaganda more deeply than any bomb. It forced the prisoners to see their enemy not as monsters, but as men. That realization carried consequences. Some returned home questioning everything they had believed. Others buried the conflict, refusing to speak of it. But none forgot. The memories of those Christmases lived like secret lights inside them, small but unextinguishable. Decades later, reunions revealed the depth of these bonds. Former prisoners returned to American towns, shaking the hands of farmers they once worked beside. Old women brought out scarves their mothers had knitted, now frayed with time. Children showed toys carved from scraps, treasures kept for a lifetime. Tears flowed freely, words spoken at last. Friend. The story of German POWs who celebrated Christmas with their captors is not one of victories or weapons. It is a story of humanity surviving in unlikely places, of mercy stronger than hatred. For in the heart of captivity, in the midst of war, men discovered something more lasting than fear: compassion. The Germans carried that compassion back to a homeland in ruins, hidden in silence but alive within them. The Americans carried it into their communities, reminders that even in war, kindness had not died. And together, across an ocean, they shared a legacy unrecorded in textbooks but remembered in hearts. 2 Christmases when enemies became, if only for a moment, neighbors. And that is the lasting shock. that in a world torn apart by hatred, mercy found a home behind barbed wire.